first snow fell like a secret that winter soft, uncertain, afraid to touch the ground. The streets shimmered with pale light, and the world felt hushed, as if holding its breath. That was the night I met her, the woman who would change every quiet corner of my life. I was escaping the cold inside a small cafe at the corner of 8th and Willow. The windows fogged from warmth and whispered laughter. Jazz played faintly, like the sound of something lost, trying to find its way home. She sat by the window, sketching. Her hair framed her face in gentle waves, falling forward as she leaned closer to the page. Outside, snow gathered like powdered sugar on the glass. Inside, her pencil moved as if the world obeyed her rhythm. I remember thinking she didn't look real. She looked remembered, like a dream you once had and were foolish enough to forget. Then, I spilled my coffee. The cup slipped from my shaking hands, dark liquid spreading like ink across the wooden floor. A sharp gasp, a flutter of napkins and laughter. Not mocking, soft, warm. The kind of laughter that forgives you before you even apologize. You're nervous. She said, eyes glinting beneath the soft cafe light. I wanted to say only because you exist, but I just smiled, fumbling for dignity I didn't have. First day with hands, I said instead. She laughed again. Then it's a good day to start over. That's how it began. We talked about nothing and everything. The way snow made the world look cleaner than it was. The way art could capture moments that words failed to keep. She told me she didn't believe in fate. People use fate as an excuse, she said, sketching my hand, the same one that had spilled coffee moments ago. They call coincidence destiny when they're too scared to admit it's just timing, I said. Timing is just fate wearing a disguise. She looked at me then, really looked, and smiled in that quiet, knowing way of hers. Then maybe, she said softly, this is fate in costume. That night, time folded. I didn't know it then, but she had already begun sketching her way into me. Every word she spoke pressed into the fabric of who I was, light strokes that would one day scar. We met again a week later. I told myself it was coincidence, but deep down, I knew I'd been orbiting her ever since that night. The snow had thickened by then. The cafe window was framed with frost. Her seat by the glass was waiting as if the universe itself had saved it for her. She was sketching again. This time, she drew the snowflakes melting on the window pane. They vanished too fast, I said. She replied, that's why they're beautiful. Her world was built on vanishing things, moments, people, promises, but I was young and foolish enough to believe I could be the exception. As the weeks turned to months, the cafe became our ritual. The smell of roasted beans, the hum of warmth against a frozen city, and her, always her, in that same spot, tracing life into lines. Sometimes she drew me. Sometimes she drew things I couldn't see. Memories, she'd say, smiling faintly. They don't stay still, so I catch them before they fade. I didn't realize she was already practicing how to let go. The night before Christmas Eve, we walked outside together. The snow was falling harder, sticking to our coats, to her hair. Streetlights scattered halos on the ground. She reached out and caught a snowflake on her palm. It melted instantly. See, she whispered, even beautiful things disappear when you try to hold them. Her words should have warned me, but all I saw was how the snow lightened her face, how her breath looked like poetry escaping into the night. I said, then I'll learn to hold the cold. She smiled, that same teasing smile from the first night, and whispered, you'll freeze before you learn. She didn't know how right she'd be. When I think back now, I realize love doesn't begin with grand gestures or burning confessions. It begins in small moments, a shared laugh, a spilled coffee, a sketch on napkin paper. It begins quietly, like snowfall, and you never notice the weight of it until it buries you. That winter was the start of everything, and the first snow, the softest. Purest thing I'd ever seen was the same snow that would one day bury her name, beneath the weight of everything left unsaid, because love, like snow, never announces when it will fall. It just does, and when it settles, the world is never the same again. Love, I learned, doesn't arrive all at once. It seeps into you through the quiet things, the rituals, the moments you don't realize are sacred until they start to disappear. For us, it began with the little ritual. Every night at 11:27, she would call. Not 11:30, not 11:25, always 11:27. She said that was when the stars looked brightest from her window. So I began setting alarms. I'd stop everything, work, reading, even breathing, just to hear her voice drift through the static. She'd talk about her sketches, about how the city looked from her apartment balcony, about how she couldn't draw the same snow twice because the world keeps melting before I can finish it. Sometimes she'd hum songs I didn't know, and I'd listen the way a believer listens to prayer. Those calls became our world. Invisible, fragile, but real. It felt like building a home out of sound. We met every Friday at the cafe, the one where Snow first introduced us. She'd always arrive late, cheeks pink, hair damp with melted frost, apologizing between smiles. "I lost track of time," she'd say, clutching her sketchbook like a secret. I'd always forgive her, because when she was there, the rest of the world dimmed. We'd talk for hours, tracing dreams onto paper napkins. She'd draw small things, my coffee cup, the curve of my hand, the reflection of lights in the window. And every time she'd finish, she'd tear out the page and hand it to me. "A memory," she'd say. I kept them all. Every napkin, every line, every trace of her. One evening, snow fell again, light and delicate, as if remembering us. She leaned across the table, her voice barely a whisper. "Let's make a promise." Her eyes gleamed like frost-catching light. "Every Christmas Eve," she said, "we meet here. No matter what. No excuses. No gifts, just us." She smiled. "It's not about presents. It's about showing up." I nodded, not realizing how heavy those words would one day become. Because promises are easy when you're still in love with the idea of forever. The years that followed were built from repetition. Our calls, our meetings, our rituals. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't grand. It was slow and steady like snowfall, quiet, patient, deceiving. I thought consistency meant security, but I didn't see how she was fading. Little by little, behind the curtain of her own dreams, she started missing calls. At first, it was once, then twice. Then the silence became its own kind of presence, heavy, shapeless, suffocating. When I'd ask, she'd smile faintly. "I've been busy. Deadlines, clients." But her eyes told another story, one of distance, of slipping away. Still, I kept showing up. Every Friday, every Christmas Eve, because love to me meant waiting, even when she stopped reaching for my hand across the table. Even when her laughter began to sound like obligation instead of joy. Even when I began to feel like a guest in my own story. One night, I walked her home through the snow. She was quiet. The kind of quiet that carries weight. Her breath clouded the air. The streetlights flickered gold against her hair. "Do you ever think," she said suddenly, "that love is just two people promising not to leave until one of them does?" I looked at her, confused. "Are you planning to leave?" She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. I didn't say that. She didn't have to. Her silence spoke louder than any confession. After that, she grew even more distant. Her sketches changed to darker, sharper, filled with faceless figures and broken lines. When I asked her what they meant, she said, "Not everything that's beautiful is meant to last." I didn't understand then. I thought she was just tired. But silence, I would learn, isn't peace. It's preparation. Behind her silence, something was blooming quietly, visibly like rot beneath snow. That Christmas Eve, I waited at the cafe again. Our table was empty except for the untouched cup of cocoa I'd ordered for her. The one she always said tasted like childhood. The snow outside blurred the world into watercolor. I watched each flake fall and melt on the window, each one vanishing before I could remember its shape. The clock struck 11:27, then 11:28, then 11:29. I did it anyway. Because love, I told myself, was about showing up, even when the other person doesn't. When the cafe closed, I stayed behind for a moment longer, staring at the seat across from me, still warm, still empty. Her last napkin sketch lay folded in my pocket. I took it out, tracing her signature soft, slanted, careless. It was of the cafe window, the same one she used to sit by. Only this time, in the drawing, the chair opposite hers was empty. And for the first time, I understood. She'd been drawing her goodbye long before she said it. The snow outside didn't stop. Neither did I, because I hadn't realized yet that showing up for someone who's already gone is just another way of standing in the cold, pretending it's still warm. The night of her exhibition smelled like oil paint and champagne, the scent of success wrapped in deceit. The gallery shimmered with soft golden light, every wall dressed in her work. Her name floated across banners and whispers like a promise fulfilled. She had finally made it. And I was there, the shadow behind her triumph. I stood near the entrance, clutching the small white card that said guest, not partner, not muse, just guest. The walls were lined with pieces I knew too well. The curve of a brushstroke, the muted color palettes, all echoes of nights we spent together. Her hands smudged with paint, mine tracing her jaw as she worked. But then, I saw it. The painting hung in the center of the room, under its own light, our cafe. The window frost, the empty chair, the snow falling beyond the glass. It was our story. Every detail, every color, every moment that had once belonged to us. The title read, "Still Waiting," beneath it her signature. Except it wasn't hers alone, two names, hers and his. Applause filled the room. He stood beside her, the man I'd only heard her mention once. A fellow artist. A collaborator, she'd said. Someone who understood her work. He placed his hand on the small of her back as the cameras flashed. She turned toward him, smiling that same soft, secret smile that used to belong to me. In that moment, I felt something inside me fracture. Not break, fracture, slowly, quietly, like ice underfoot. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. My memories were hanging on that wall, stolen, resigned, applauded. After the speeches, I found her near the exit, surrounded by people congratulating her. She looked radiant under the lights, polished, distant, unreachable. When she finally saw me, something flickered across her face. Guilt, maybe? Or fear? "Congratulations," I said. My voice steady even though my hands weren't. She smiled carefully, like she was stepping around glass. "You came, I always do." That silence, sharp, loaded, stretching between us, was heavier than any argument. Finally, I asked why his name. Her expression didn't waver. "It's just business," she said softly. "Don't make it personal." Her words sliced through me like cold wind. Just business. As if what we built, every sketch, every late-night confession, every silent morning over coffee, was a transaction she'd already completed. "Love is personal," I said. "You painted my heart on that wall and gave it away." She didn't look away. But she didn't apologize either. "Then maybe," she whispered, "you shouldn't have given it so icily." That night, I walked out of the gallery into the falling snow. The city lights blurred through tears I refused to let fall. The world around me felt colder, not because of the weather, but because the warmth I once believed in had turned to ash. I kept seeing her face in every reflection on glass windows. Puddles, passing cars. Her smile lingered like an echo I couldn't silence. I found myself back at the cafe, drawn there by habit, by muscle memory, by the ghost of what we used to be. The chair by the window was empty. I sat there, staring at my reflection in the glass, the same spot she used to sketch from, on the napkin in front of me. I drew two signatures, hers and his. Then I crossed them out until the paper tore. I realized something then. Silence doesn't mean peace. Sometimes it's the sound of everything breaking quietly, just enough for no one else to notice. She hadn't yelled. She hadn't cheated loudly. She had erased me with grace, one painting at a time. And the cruelest part? She didn't destroy me out of hate. She simply outgrew me like a muse turned into a mistake. Later that night, I saw her name trending online. Articles calling her the voice of modern solitude, the artist who captures longing like no one else. And there I was, the nameless inspiration behind her masterpiece. I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because there was nothing left to say. She had taken our love and translated it into art, and in doing so, made me invisible. Before I left the cafe, I looked once more at the napkin, now torn and ink-stained. I wrote one final line at the bottom. Some stories don't end there, just signed by someone else. Then I folded it and left it under my empty cup. Outside, the snow was heavier now. I walked into it without an umbrella, without direction, without her. Each flake that landed on my skin felt like a whisper, cold, fleeting, gone before I could feel it fully. That was the night I stopped believing in promises. That was the night I learned that silence can scream louder than heartbreak. She vanished quietly. No fight, no farewell, not even a whisper of closure. Just silence. One day she was everywhere. Her laughter in my voicemail, her scent on my coat, her name in the margins of every unfinished sketch. And then she was gone. No calls, no messages, no forwarding address. Her apartment was emptied, her socials wiped clean like she never existed. The world moved on as if she'd been a passing dream, but I couldn't. Because dreams don't leave coffee cups in your sink. Her absence wasn't empty, it hummed. It lingered in the spaces between things, in the static of my phone. In the empty chair by the window, in the way my heart still reached for her name before I fell asleep. People told me to forget. Move on. But love doesn't come with an off switch. And grief. Grief is an obsession. It's loyalty with nowhere left to go. The first Christmas Eve after her disappearance, I went to the cafe again. Snow fell like dust over memory. Slow, gentle, cruel. I sat at our table, the one by the window, where the frost used to gather in small, perfect circles. Her seat was empty. I kept glancing at the door, the way I used to when she was late, waiting for the bell to chime, for her to walk in with. Paint still smudged on her hands, apologizing for being caught up in life. But she didn't come. The bell didn't ring. The waiter, a new kid who didn't know our story, asked if I was expecting someone. I lied and said no. Because how do you explain to a stranger that you're waiting for a ghost who promised to meet you forever? Days turned into months, then years. And yet I kept returning the same table, the same silence. The world changed outside the cafe window. New buildings rose, faces aged, winters melted and came again. But inside, time stayed frozen. The chair across from me remained untouched, sacred, as if sitting in it would erase her shadow. I tried to move on. I really did. I dated people who smiled like sunlight, who tried to love me back into the present. But every time they reached for my hand, I flinched, because their warmth wasn't hers. One of them asked me once, "Who are you saving that seat for?" said someone who forgot to come back. Sometimes I'd walk past art galleries, hoping to see her name again, somewhere, anywhere. I'd imagine her in a foreign city, painting new skies, telling new stories that didn't include me. Maybe she changed her name. Maybe she found peace. Maybe she was happy. But if she was, why did the silence still sound like goodbye? The second Christmas Eve, I brought her old sketches with me, the ones she drew on napkins, the ones I couldn't throw away. Laid them on the table, one by one, like offerings. The cafe lights dimmed, reflecting off the glass, and for a brief moment, I saw her reflection there, faint, flickering, smiling softly like she used to. I blinked. She was gone again. Maybe she'd never really left. Maybe she just existed now between the folds of memory and illusion. By the third year, people had stopped asking about her. They stopped mentioning her name, stopped pitying me. Stop trying to fix what wasn't broken, only unfinished. They called it obsession. I called it remembrance. Because love doesn't die when someone leaves. It just changes shape. Sometimes, when the world grew too quiet, I'd hear her voice faint, distant, like a memory calling through water. "Don't wait too long," she'd whisper. And I'd whisper back, "I'm still here." One night, I wrote her a letter. I didn't know where to send it, so I left it on the cafe table. You disappeared like you were never meant to stay, I wrote. But every time the snow falls, I see your silhouette in the glass. I don't know if you're alive, or happy, or even thinking of me. But I still show up because you said it wasn't about gifts, only showing up. So here I am, still keeping the promise. The next morning, the letter was gone. Maybe the staff threw it away, or maybe she came back in the night just long enough to take it. I'll never know. Years later, I still visit. Not every day, not out of pain, but out of habit. A quiet kind of devotion that no longer hurts. The barista knows my order by heart now. 1 black coffee, 1 cup of cocoa left untouched. They don't ask anymore who it's for. They just smile, as if they understand that some rituals aren't meant to end. Tonight, snow falls again. The glass fogs the same way it did years ago. And as I sit there, alone but not lonely, I finally understand. She didn't take my heart with her when she vanished. She just left it here, buried beneath time, waiting to thaw. Because love doesn't disappear. It lingers in empty chairs, in quiet cafes, in the kind of silence that still knows your name. And every Christmas Eve, when the world sleeps under, white, I still find myself whispering to the empty seat across from me. I showed up. Again. 3 winters passed. 3 years of waiting for footsteps that never echoed again on the tiled floor of that cafe. Time didn't heal me. It simply layered dust over the memory, made it quieter, not lighter. The world went on. Seasons changed, cities grew, people forgot. But in some cruel way, my heart remained in that single December, frozen, loyal, foolish. Then one morning, it arrived. The envelope was pale and weathered, its corners softened by travel and time. No name, no return address. Just my own scrawled on the front in handwriting that trembled with familiarity. For a long time, I didn't open it. I just stared. Because sometimes, the possibility of what's inside is heavier than the truth itself. I ran my fingers over the ink, faint, slightly smudged but unmistakable. Her handwriting, the same looping strokes she used when signing her paintings, the same delicate pressure that once brushed my skin when she'd traced shapes on my arm in silence. It was her. After 3 years of nothingness, it was her. When I finally tore the envelope open, a faint scent escaped, lavender and turpentine, the perfume of her old studio. Inside was a single folded page and something fragile pressed between it. I unfolded the letter slowly, afraid it might vanish if I moved too quickly. It wasn't long. Just 1 line. I'm sorry I couldn't be what you waited for. That was it. No greeting. No date. No signature. Just that, and beneath it, a small, pressed flower, dry, delicate, perfectly preserved. The same kind she used to draw when she was dreaming. I sat there for a long time, the world narrowing to that single page. The words didn't cut. They sank deep, deliberate, final. It wasn't an apology meant for forgiveness. It was a confession written too late. I could almost hear her voice as I read it again, whispering the words softly, the way she used to when she spoke to her canvas, as if afraid of scaring the moment away. I couldn't be what you waited for. Not who? What? As if I'd been waiting for a version of her that never existed, a dream shaped by devotion, not reality. The pressed flower trembled slightly between my fingers. It was blue, or maybe it used to be. The color had faded into a ghostly hue, like something that had forgotten how to be alive. But it was familiar. It was the same flower she once sketched for me years ago. During one of our late-night calls, she'd said, if I could be a flower, I'd be this one. Small, easy to overlook, but impossible to kill. I'd laughed then, telling her she was anything but small now. Holding it in my hand, I wondered if she'd meant that as a warning. I didn't cry. Not because I didn't want to, but because there was something sacred about her silence. Tears would have made it ordinary, and nothing about her ever was. Instead, I folded the letter carefully with reverence. Like I was tucking away the ghost of something holy, I placed it inside the old sketchbook she'd left behind. Between 2 blank pages, because that's what we were, a beginning and an end, with nothing in between. That night, I went back to the cafe. The same seat, The same window? Outside, the snow fell in slow motion, like the sky itself was remembering. I placed the letter on the table, next to her cup that would never be filled again. I whispered into the empty air, "You don't have to be what I waited for. You already were." A couple nearby laughed, their hands brushing across the table. The sound was gentle, distant, like a memory I used to live in. I thought about burning the letter, letting the words dissolve into smoke, but I couldn't, because in some strange way it wasn't an ending. It was proof that she had remembered that somewhere in her wandering, she had thought of me. Maybe she wrote it before leaving the country. Maybe she sent it from a hospital. Maybe she had already gone by the time it reached me. The possibilities hurt, but they were all I had left of her. When I left the cafe that night, I tucked the pressed flower into my coat pocket. It felt weightless, but I carried it like an anchor. The streetlights blurred through the snow, turning the world into a watercolor. I looked up at the sky and thought, she's somewhere under this same moon, maybe painting, maybe healing, maybe watching the snow and thinking of me just once more. And that was enough. Love doesn't always end in reunion. Sometimes it ends in understanding, quiet, imperfect, beautiful. That letter wasn't her return. It was her goodbye, dressed as mercy. And though I never heard from her again, I still keep the flower pressed in that sketchbook. It hasn't crumbled. It hasn't changed. Maybe in its stillness, it learned what we never could, how to stay without breaking. Years passed and the cafe became my church. Not of faith, but of memory. A place where I confessed to the ghosts no one else could see. The baristas changed. The music changed. Even the cups were new. But the corner seat by the window, our seat, stayed the same. It was as if the universe itself refused to erase her completely. Every morning, sat there with a notebook and a lukewarm cup of coffee. I told myself it was habit, not longing. But habit is just love wearing endurance like a disguise. Outside, life moved on. Inside, I stayed still. Sometimes, when the snow fell just right, I thought I saw her. A woman walking past the cafe window, her hair tied up in that familiar, careless knot. Her posture the same, that gentle lean forward, that quiet grace that made even winter look softer. Sometimes she was alone. Sometimes she held a child's hand, small, bundled, skipping to keep up, and every time my heart stuttered. Every time I blinked. And every time she was gone. Just reflections, I told myself. Or maybe memory playing tricks again. But what if it wasn't? What if it was her living a new life I was never meant to see? The thought didn't hurt as much as it used to. It just ached, like an old scar waking in the rain. I started writing. Not for her, not anymore, but because silence had begun to rot inside me. I wrote poems she'd never read, letters I'd never send. Each word a small confession, each page a resurrection. Love became ink. Regret became routine. Sometimes I'd start with her name, but I'd always cross it out. Not to forget, but to protect what little of her still belonged to me. I wrote about snow that never melted, about eyes that forgot how to meet, about promises that aged like bruises, darker, quieter, still tender. The cafe owner, an older man with kind eyes, once asked me, "Who are you always writing to?" I smiled, someone who doesn't exist anymore. He nodded, as if he understood. Maybe he did. One evening, the sky bruised purple before it bled into night. The streetlights flickered on, and the glass reflected me, older now, lonelier, softer. I was about to leave when I saw her again. She stood across the street, framed by snowfall, hair tied up. A small child by her side. Her coat was the same shade of blue she once wore when she told me. Blue feels like hope that forgot how to be loud. She turned her head slightly and I froze. Even from that distance, even through glass and snow and years, I knew it was her. My chest filled with every version of her I'd ever known. The girl who laughed in the cafe. The woman who betrayed me. The ghost who left me letters made of silence. The child tugged her hand. She looked down, smiled, and for a moment, I saw the curve of her lips reflected in the glass. The same smile that once made me believe in forever. I stood. She turned her gaze toward the window, and for a heartbeat no longer our eyes met. Then she was gone. I ran outside, half mad with disbelief, scanning the street. The snow swallowed her footprints. The air tasted of memory and loss. No trace, no sound. Just the faint echo of a child's laughter drifting down the empty street. Maybe it was her. Maybe it wasn't. But I felt something shift, something final. She was alive. And that was enough. That night I wrote again. But for the first time, the words weren't about her absence. They were about her existence, somewhere out there beyond my reach. Painting her life in colors I'd never see, I wrote, "You've become the kind of memory that no longer hurts to hold. You're a quiet proof that love, once real, never truly disappears. It just learns to live elsewhere." I didn't cross it out. I let it stay. The snow fell heavier outside the cafe window, blurring the city into watercolor. I sipped my cold coffee, feeling something like peace, fragile, foreign, but real. I understood then. Promises don't dissolve. They haunt. But haunting isn't always cruel. Sometimes it's just love's way of making sure you don't forget who you once were. When the lights dimmed, I packed my notebook and stood. At the door, I looked back one last time at the window, the one that had reflected every version of me. The dreamer, the fool, the believer, the survivor. And for the first time in years, I smiled. Maybe she'd pass by again next winter. Maybe not. But I'd still be here, not waiting, not yearning, just remembering. Because love, I finally realized, doesn't end with goodbye. It ends with recognition. The quiet kind that says, "You were here. You mattered. You still do." It was Christmas Eve again. Snow drifted outside the cafe window, soft, relentless, endless. The world had gone quiet, wrapped in white silence. I sat in my usual seat, hands cupped around a coffee that had already gone cold. I wasn't waiting anymore. Not really. At least that's what I told myself. Then the doorbell chimed. I looked up, half out of habit, and froze. A small girl stood there, her cheeks flushed from the cold, clutching a neatly wrapped box with trembling fingers. She looked around, hesitant, before her gaze found me. And in that instant, my breath left me. Because her eyes, they were hers. The same color, the same quiet depth. Winter sky and nostalgia bound together. She walked up to my table, stepped small but certain, like she had rehearsed this 100 times. Her voice when she spoke was barely above a whisper. "Are you Mr. Hahn?" I nodded slowly. My name hadn't sounded that fragile in years. "She told me to find you," the girl said, holding out the box with both hands. "She said you always waited." Her words split something open inside me, something I thought had long since turned to stone. I reached out, my hand trembling, and took the box. The paper was gold, slightly faded at the corners. My heart recognized it before my mind did. It was that gift, the one I'd bought for her 12 years ago, the night before she disappeared, the one I never got to give. "She said it was yours," the girl continued softly. She found it again. Her voice trailed off, swallowed by the hum of quiet Christmas music playing in the background. Before she what? But I didn't need to ask. I already knew. The child's fingers tightened around the hem of her coat. "She told me you'd understand," she said. I wanted to speak, to ask questions, to hold on to the sound of her voice that wasn't hers, but almost. Instead, all I could manage was, "What's your name?" She smiled, small, shy, radiant. "My name is Hannah." The air left my lungs. Hannah, the name we had once whispered in the quiet between dreams. The name we had chosen for the daughter we might have had. In some kinder version of our story, the universe, cruel, poetic, and precise, had given me her name after all. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. The cafe faded into blur. The lights, the chatter, the clinking of cups. All that remained was the small girl standing before me, the echo of a love that had never truly left. She fidgeted slightly, glancing toward the window. She said, "You like to sit here," she murmured, "and that you always ordered 2 drinks, even when you were alone." Her gaze lifted to the untouched cup of cocoa on the table. She said that was hers. I smiled faintly, my throat tightening. She was right. I didn't ask who the father was. Didn't ask where they had lived, or how she'd found me. None of that mattered anymore. Instead, I asked, "Do you know why she wanted you to bring this to me?" The girl hesitated, then looked down at the gift. She said, "You waited for her too long, and she didn't want you to wait anymore." Tears welled in her eyes, though she didn't understand why she was crying. She said you were kind, that she hurt you, but you never stopped showing up. My voice trembled when I answered. "I promised I would," she nodded, as if she understood something deeper than her years allowed. "Can I tell you something?" she asked. "Of course," she said. When she painted, she always thought of the man in the window, the one who waited, even when no one came. Her small hand pointed toward the chair across from me. She said that's what love looks like. Her words landed like snow, soft, quiet, devastating. After she left, the cafe felt impossibly still. I stared at the golden box in front of me, hands trembling as I untied the faded ribbon. Inside was a small sketch, our cafe, drawn in her old familiar strokes. 2 cups, 2 chairs, one occupied, one waiting, and on the back written in her handwriting, "Thank you for keeping the promise, even when I couldn't." The ink had bled slightly, maybe from time, maybe from tears. I traced the words with my thumb until they blurred. Outside, snow began to fall harder, blanketing the street in white. Through the window, I could still see the small figure of the girl Hannah, walking away, her coat fluttering in the wind. She turned once, waved, and smiled. The same smile her mother had given me that very first winter, and for the first time in years. I smiled back. Some stories don't end with closure. Some end with continuation, in smaller hands, in new eyes. In the fragile kindness of what remains, as the snow fell endlessly outside, I whispered to the empty chair across from me. She came back. It's not the woman I loved, but the proof that love never truly leaves. The gold paper crinkled softly beneath my fingers, that familiar, fragile sound of something both old and sacred. It trembled in my hands, light as air, yet heavy as every winter I'd ever waded through. The little girl had already gone, leaving only the faint scent of winter behind her, cold air pine, and the lingering warmth of something I wasn't sure I deserved. Outside, the snow was falling harder, turning the world into a slow-moving painting. Inside, the cafe was silent except for the low hum of jazz and the uneven beating of my own heart. I set the box down carefully, like it might shatter under its own memory. Then, with slow, deliberate fingers, I untied the ribbon. The paper peeled away like a memory unfolding. Inside was a single sheet of sketch paper, slightly yellowed, edges frayed. The faint scent of charcoal and lavender rising from it, and there I was. She had drawn me, sitting at this very table. Coffee untouched, my head tilted toward the window, my face calm, almost peaceful, as if waiting wasn't a burden but a purpose. She had captured it all. The way I always sat with one hand curled around the mug, the faint smile I wore when pretending I wasn't breaking. She had seen me even when she was gone. My throat tightened. I couldn't look away, because this was proof. Proof that I hadn't been erased, that somewhere, in some corner of her heart, I'd still existed. I turned the page over, on the back. Her handwriting, the same looping lines that had once written me letters full of dreams. Now, it was just one sentence. "Thank you for keeping the promise, even when I couldn't." The ink had faded slightly, but her words were alive. Each stroke felt intentional, gentle, apologetic, as if she knew this would be the last thing she ever said to me. I read it once, then again, and again, until the letters blurred and the words became soundless echoes of her voice. I whispered them aloud. They tasted like closure, in grief. and forgiveness I didn't know I still needed. I leaned back, closing my eyes, and for a moment I saw her. Not the woman from the gallery. Not the stranger who'd betrayed me, but the version of her who used to draw in the cafe, laughing at the steam curling from her cup. The version who believed in promises. The version who made me believe too. I saw her smile, faint, apologetic, but real. And behind her, the soft shadow of the little girl, Hannah, holding a sketchbook of her own. That was when I understood. She hadn't forgotten me. She'd immortalized me. Not in fame or guilt, but in story. In her daughter's memory. In the art that outlived her body. The snow outside thickened, each flake pressing itself against the glass, blurring the world into white. I reached out and touched the window, leaving a faint print behind the same way she used to trace shapes in the fog years ago. The glass was cold, but the moment was warm, because she was still here. Not in flesh, not in voice, but in the quiet persistence of art, the only language she ever truly spoke fluently. I looked down at the sketch again. She had drawn me waiting, but I realized something she must have known all along. I wasn't waiting for her. I was waiting for peace, and in that moment, I found it. I folded the sketch carefully, holding it against my chest before slipping it back into the box. Then I whispered, "You made it back to me after all." As I stood to leave, I looked once more at the empty chair across from me. For the first time, it didn't look empty. It looked complete, like its purpose had finally been fulfilled. I left the cafe quietly, the small box tucked under my arm. Outside, the snow fell faster, clinging to my coat. Melting on my skin, each step I took left a mark that was quickly covered. But that was okay. Because not everything meant to be remembered needed to be seen. When I reached the corner, I turned back. Through the window, I could see the faint reflection of two figures. One man sitting, Kay. One woman standing beside him, both made of memory and light. They smiled at each other the way they once did. And then, with the soft chime of the cafe door closing, the image faded. That night, I placed the box on my desk beside the old sketchbook filled with her drawings. I opened to the last page, blank, and wrote beneath it in careful ink, "You kept your promise in the only way you could." Then, I placed her sketch there, my image, drawn by her hands, and closed the book. The candle flickered beside me. The snow fell quietly outside, and for the first time in 12 years, I didn't feel the weight of waiting. Only the warmth of having been loved once, imperfectly, but enough to be remembered, because love doesn't die in silence. It lingers in what we leave behind. And tonight, she finally let me go. Not with a goodbye, but with a gift that said, "You were real." The girl left. The bell above the cafe door chimed one last time, and the sound lingered like the echo of a prayer that didn't know if it had been answered outside. The snow was still falling, soft, unhurried, endless. Each flake landed quietly against the glass, erasing the world beyond into a blur of white and memory. I sat there long after she was gone, her small footprints fading into the street outside. The gift box rested on the table beside my cup, the gold paper glinting under the amber lights. For the first time in years, I didn't feel the urge to look toward the door. I didn't expect her to walk in, didn't replay old moments in my mind, didn't reach for ghosts. I simply watched the snow. It fell with the gentleness of forgiveness. It's the kind that doesn't ask to be earned. The cafe was nearly empty now. Chairs stacked, lights dimmed, the barista humming a soft tune that melted into the rhythm of snowfall. I traced the rim of my cup with my fingers, slow circles. Endless loops, the same pattern I used to make when I was waiting for her. But this time, it wasn't waiting. It was remembering. There's a difference. Waiting carries weight. Remembering carries warmth, and tonight, the weight was gone. Through the window, the streetlight flickered, casting long shadows across the snow. It reminded me of the night we first met, the first snow, the spill of coffee. The sound of her laughter wrapping itself around me like a scarf I never wanted to take off. How young we were. How foolishly certain that love was enough to keep two people in the same orbit forever. But love isn't gravity. It's whether it changes, it fades, It returns when you least expect it. And now, years later, as snow painted the world white again, I realized I'd been chasing seasons instead of peace. I thought of her, not the way she left, but the way she lived. How she drew beauty out of silence. How her hands always smelled faintly of charcoal and rain. How she'd pause mid-sentence, eyes distant, as if the world she wanted existed just beyond what words could reach. For the longest time, I resented her for disappearing. But maybe leaving was the only way she knew how to love, by freeing the things she couldn't keep. I looked at the empty chair across from me and whispered, "You did keep your promise, just differently." The snow answered by falling harder, each flake glimmering under the streetlight like a small truth. I stood to leave. The air outside bit at my skin, but it didn't feel cruel, only real. The kind of cold that reminds you you're still alive. I walked slowly, following the faint tracks left by the girl by Hannah. Each step felt lighter, as if with every crunch of snow beneath my boots, I was letting go of something I'd carried for too long. At the corner of the street, I stopped and looked back. Through the fogged window, the cafe glowed softly, a beacon of warmth in a world built on frost. And there, reflected faintly in the glass, I saw her. Not as she was, but as she would want to be remembered, smiling, serene, her hand resting on the shoulder of the man who never stopped waiting. When I blinked, she was gone. Only the reflection of falling snow remained. I walked home beneath a sky heavy with white, the silence thick and kind. Each flake that landed on my coat melted instantly, like small confessions fading into forgiveness. For years I had waited for her return. Now I was waiting for something quieter, peace, maybe, or understanding. Something less like her and more like myself. Because some loves don't end, they just transform. They settle into the corners of who we become. They turn into stories we tell, paintings we hang, or promises we keep long after anyone remembers why. When I reached home, I placed her drawing, the one of me waiting at the cafe by the window. The snow beyond made it glow under the faint light of the street lamp. I sat beside it, hands folded, heart still, and for the first time, I wasn't haunted. I was grateful. Grateful for the waiting, the breaking, the surviving. Grateful that she had loved me even if imperfectly, even if briefly, in a way that still made the snow feel like a memory instead of an ending. Outside, the flakes kept falling, soft, endless, forgiving. Each one whispered something as it touched the ground, a wordless hymn only love could translate. I closed my eyes and listened. And somewhere in that silence, between the rise and fall of breath, I swear I heard her voice, faint, warm, familiar. "You can rest now." So I did. Under the snow's gentle mercy, I finally let her go. Not into the past, but into peace.